Masechet Makkot Daf Chaf Aleph. The Mishnah taught V'hameseret serita achat, someone who cuts an incision on their body as a display of mourning for the dead deserves lashes. Tenor Rabbanan V'seret Yachol afilu sarat al beto shenafal v'al sefinato shetab'a bayam Talmud lomad lanefesh eno chayav ela al hamet bilvad. This is going to be a midrash on this pasuk here in Vayikra 19 that says V'seret lanefesh lo titenu bibsarchem uchtovet ka'aka lo titenu bachem ani Adonai. So seret, that's a gash, lanefesh is because of a dead person. Do not put on your flesh. We'll talk about the ketovet ka'aka in the next Mishnah about tattoos. So here we have seret, and that teaches us a gash. Lanefesh is for a dead person. So let's go back to the Midrash. The fact that it says seret, a gash, so we ask, could it be true that one would be liable to lashes even if one gashed oneself over grief because one's house fell down, or his ship sunk in the sea with all his merchandise, and he's so depressed he gashes himself? Would he also be liable to lashes? And the answer is no. It says la nefesh, one is only liable if he gashes himself in mourning. This was a common ancient practice, a mourning practice, to gash oneself to express grief about it, excessive grief. The Torah does not allow that. Of course, you have to be sad, you have to mourn, but this is excessive grief, which is not allowed. But the lashes are only if one does so out of mourning, not for other reasons. Uminayin lam saret chamesh shritot al met ehad shu chayav al kol achat ve'achat. And furthermore, the Midrash asks, how do you know that if someone makes 5 cuts in their flesh because of one relative that died, how do you know that they would be still liable to 5 counts of lashes? Talmud lomad v'seret l'chayav al kol srita usrita. It says seret, a gash, to teach that every single gash, not in plural but in singular, one is liable to lashes. Rabbi Yosef Omer, minayin la mesaret serita achat al chamisha metim shu chayav al kol achat ve'achat. Rabbi Yosef asks, what if someone makes 1 gash for 5 people that died? 5 people died in some time period that he knew, and he makes only 1 gash in his skin for all of them. How do you know that he is still liable for 5 counts? Talmud lomad la nefesh lechayev al kol nefesh v'nefesh. Because the pasuk says for a person and singular, and that means for every single person, even though it's only 1 gash, but you had in mind 5 people, that's 5 sets of lashes. Okay, that's the baraita. Now we ask, how could Rabbi Yosef use the word la nefesh to teach that one is liable 5 times, even for 1 gash, if it's for 5 people? After all, we also need it for what we learned up here, that one is only liable to lashes for mourning over dead, but not if you're sad over a financial loss. Rabbi Yosef surely agrees with that loss. So we already used this word la nefesh, and you can't use it twice. And the answer is kasava Rabbi Yosef serita ugedida achati uchti batam lamet. The answer is that Rabbi Yosef is relying on a different pasuk in Devarim that says lo titkodedu lo tasimu korcha ben einechem lamet. There's 2 laws here. Lo titkodedu is do not gash yourself, and then it says and don't make a bald spot lamet because of a dead person. So the lamet is going on the beginning also. Do not gash yourselves, lamet. Lo titkodedu, lamet. We're about to see that there's another opinion that says these are 2 different prohibitions that have different definitions. However, Rabbi Yosef thinks that they are the same, even though the pasuk in Vayikra uses the word sirita, and the pasuk in Devarim uses the word gedida lo titkodedu. It's the same, it's referring to the same thing. If someone gashes themselves, they'd be liable to 2 counts of lashes because he violates both of these laws. In any case, in that pasuk it already says lamet, so therefore I can learn from that pasuk that one is liable to lashes only because of mourning over a dead person, because it says lamet. That leaves open the word lanefesh to be free to learn something else. And that's how Rabbi Yosef learns from there that one is liable to 5 counts, even for one gesh if it's for 5 people. Amar Shemuel, Hamsaret Bikli Chayav. Shemuel rules that if someone gashes themselves with a utensil, they are liable. Clearly, by using the word hamsaret, he is referring to this pasuk in Vayikra, veseret lanefesh. So this certainly applies when using a utensil. Presumably, he means that also applies when not using utensil, if you use your own fingers or fingernails to make a gash. And now Shemuel also has the other law of lo titkodedu, which is a different verb. And that actually sounds like it's talking about with a utensil. And so it sounds like, according to Shemuel, one would be liable twice if you use a utensil. Now we ask, Metibe sirita ugedida achati, ela shesirita beyad ugedida bikli. There's a braita that contradicts Shemuel because it makes a clear distinction between sirita and gedida, the two verbs used in 2 different pesukim. And here it says that although they are the same in that both of them involve making a gash in one's flesh, but sirita is using your hand, using your fingers to make a gash, and gedida is with a utensil. And so that's the opposite of Shemuel. Shemuel said that using a utensil one is liable for misaret. And here it said sirita is only with using a hand. Shemuel said it's with the utensil. So how can we reconcile this? The answer is you can't. Shemuel is following Rabbi Yosef, who just said over here, Siritan Gedida is one and the same, totally. Over here, this also said Achati, but here it meant Achati in that both are gashing themselves, but in 2 different ways. So according to this Braita, one would violate either one or the other, but not both, if you use a utensil or by hand. But according to Rabbi Yosef, they're totally the same, so that whatever you're using, utensil or a hand, one violates both of them, and it is Shemuel is in agreement with Rabbi Yosef. Taneh Tana Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, a professional reciter, said the following in front of Rabbi Yochanan: Almet ben beyad ben bekli chayav, al avodah zarah bayad chayav bekli patur. If one gashes himself over a dead person in mourning, then whether one uses his hands or uses a utensil, he is liable. But if one gashes oneself for idolatry, if that's the way to worship the idol, is to gash oneself, then using one's hand is liable. Using a vessel, utensil like a knife, one is not liable regarding the law of avodah zarah. Hold on, we have a contradiction from a pasuk that's describing the false Nevi'eh HaBaal at Hara Carmel in their context with Eliyahu HaNavi. And it says that they, in worshipping their idol Baal, they lacerated themselves in accordance with their custom with swords and lances, which means that the way of Avodah Zarah is in fact using a vessel, not doing it by hand. Ela ema beyad patur bekli chayav. Therefore, it must be that we have to switch around the order of the items in this Baraita. The Tanakh got the nusach wrong, and in fact, it means if you use by hand for Avodah Zarah, one is not liable. But if one cuts oneself for Avodah Zarah with a utensil, then one is liable, because that's the way it is done. Vechayav al harosh. The Mishnah teaches that rounding out the head and cutting off the corners, the peot, that would be liable to lashes. Machver Rav Sheshat ben Pirkei Resha. Rav Sheshat wanted to show his students where that is, so he would show them between the joints of the head, in other words, at the top of the jawbone, at that bone right there, right above the eyes. If one cuts over there, one would violate this law. Val hazakan shetayim mikan ushetayim mikan v'achat milamata machver Rav Sheshat ben pirkei dikna. And the Mishnah continues and says, if someone shaves with a razor on two sides here and 2 sides there, and one underneath and one below. So here again, Rav Sheshat showed his students by pointing. So luckily we have some nice pictures here, and this is what's called the edges or corners of the beard. Would be up here, this corner, on both sides, and then somewhere on the chin. So there we have all of the spots. Rabbi Eliezer omer im netalan. Rabbi Eliezer adds that if one shaves all 5 spots in one motion without picking up the razor, is pretty good at using a razor, and he's able to shave off all 5 spots in one swoop, then he is liable only to 1 set of lashes. Kasabat hadlavhu. So that means he thinks that this is only a single prohibition, even though it covers 5 spots. This prohibition of shaving the beard only applies if one is using a razor. If you're using a scissor, that's perfectly fine. So how do we know this? Here's a midrash. It says the corners of one's beard one may not shave. Does that mean even if one shaves it with scissors, one would be liable to lashes? No. Talmud Lomar lo tashchit. No, there's another pasuk that says, do not destroy. And destroy means you have to cut it in a way that destroys the hair altogether. With a razor, you get very, very close right to the skin, and you destroy the hair altogether. With scissors, you can't get that close, and that's why from that pasuk we learn only with a razor, not with scissors. I lo tashchit yachol im liketo b'malket urehitni yeheh chayav tamud omar lo yigalechu. But if we only had that pasuk of do not destroy, then I might have thought that if one shaved with tweezers or with a plane that you use to shave wood, those get very close. A tweezer pulls the whole hair right out. So that certainly destroys the entire hair. So I might have thought one would be liable if one uses tweezers and a plane. If I only had the word tashchit, tamud omar lo yigalechu, and that's why you have the other pasuk that says, do not shave in a way that people shave. And normal people don't shave with tweezers or a plane that carpenters use. And so from the combination of these, we learn not a plane, not tweezers, and not a scissor. Rather, a razor is what fulfills both of these. It's a normal way of shaving, and it destroys the hair altogether, and that is what's not allowed. Ha-kesad, giluach sheyesh bo hashchata haveh omer zeh ta'ar. Right, so how do we learn it from both of these? We need shaving that also destroys. So that's with a razor. It's called shaving, and it destroys the whole hair. Rabbi Eliezer omer afilu liketo b'malket urehitni yeheh chayav. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees, and he says even if you do use tweezers or a carpenter's plane, one is liable. He agrees regarding scissors, that's permitted, but these, he says, is liable. Ma nafshach igamed gezer hashava li ba'eh ta'ar ila gamed gezer hashava misparaim namela. So we don't understand Rabbi Eliezer, it's in between position. If he accepts the gezer hashava that we had here between these two pesukim, then he should agree with the conclusion that we had before and say only a razor and not a plane and tweezer. And if he does not accept the gezer hashava, then he should say that scissors also would not be allowed, because if you say lo yigalechu, scissors is a normal way of shaving, and so that also shouldn't be allowed. So either you put the pisukim together and learn that only a razor is not allowed, or don't put the pisukim together, and then all of the things should not be allowed. And the answer is lo lam gamid gezer hashava. In fact, he does join the pisukim together in a gezer hashava, v'kasabar hanemile giluach abdi. But Rabbi Eliezer thinks that tweezers or a carpenter's plane are in fact called shaving, and so they can be included also in the word lo yigalechu, and therefore he includes all these things. Anything that will destroy the hair altogether is included. Next Mishnah. Hakoteb ketobet ka'aka. Katav velo ki'akeya. Ki'ake velo katab eno chayav ad sheyichtob v'yikakeya b'dio u'b'chichol b'chol davar shehu roshem. So someone makes a tattoo. Tattoo is a 2-step process. You have to make a hole or a cut in the skin, and then you put the dye in, so the dye is not just on the surface but goes deep inside, and that's why it stays permanently. And so ketobet sounds like the writing with the dye, and kaka seems to be referring to making a slit or a hole in the skin. And so one is only liable if one does both of those things. If one wrote on one's skin without carving into the skin, or one carved something into the skin, like a line in the skin, but did not put ink and write there, then either one by itself, one would not be liable unless you do both of them. And when you do both of them, you have to put ink that will be ink, or kachol is eyeliner, a blue glue, eyeliner, or anything that makes a permanent mark will be one would be liable. But not if you just put some juice there or something that might be colored but will not leave a permanent mark. One's not liable. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda mishum Rabbi Shimon omer eno chayav ad sheichtov sham et Hashem shenemar uchtov et ka'aka lo titenu bachem ani Adonai. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said, name of Rabbi Shimon, that one is not liable for writing a tattoo unless one writes the name. Sounds like he means the name of Hashem, because the pasuk says that a tattoo do not place on yourselves Ani Hashem, as if it's saying the following. Don't write on yourselves. Don't write Ani Hashem. But according to that, if you wanted to make a picture of something, a heart, whatever, then that would not violate this law in terms of getting lashes. Amar le Rav Acha bered Rava, the Rav Asher, adichtov ani Hashem mamash. And now a question of Acha, the son of Rava, to Rav Asher. Is that what the Mishnah means? That one is only liable if you write on your skin ani Hashem. You actually do see some people writing Yud Ke Vav Ke. They think it's some kind of Kabbalistic thing as a tattoo on their skin. They don't even know what it means. So is that true? Only if you write ani Hashem, but if you write something else, then not liable. אמר לה כי דתנה בר כפרה אינו חייב עד שיכתוב שם עבודה זרה שנאמר וכתוב את קעקע לא תיתנו בכם אני השם ולא אחר. And he answered, no, that's not what it means. It means one is not liable until one writes the name of an idolatrous name. As the pasuk says, do not make a tattoo on yourselves because ani Hashem, I am Hashem, and not anyone else. So you see, according to this interpretation, the law of tattoos in this pasuk is actually related to avodah zarah, that idolaters would write the names of gods on their skin, and that's particularly what is not permitted. Amar Rav Malkiya, Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava, asur lo le'adam sheiten efer mikle al gabe makato mipnei sheniret kichtobet ka'aka. Rav Malkiya, remember that name, said, in the name of Rav Ada bar Ahava, one is not permitted to put burnt ashes on a wound because it looks like he is making a tattoo. Person has a wound, so it looks like he made a cut in his skin, and then if he's going to put burnt ashes there that have a deep color, so it looks like he's making a tattoo. And therefore, some people, they used to put burnt ashes as a medicine on a wound, but it looks too much like making a tattoo, where one makes an inscription and then one fills it in with a dye, so that's not allowed. Amar Rav Nachman bered Rav Ika shaput shefachot v'gumot malkiyu belorit efer mikle ugvina Rav Malkiya. Now there's two rabbis with very similar names and easy to confuse them. One is Rav Malkiyu, one's Rav Malkiya. So Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Ika, teaches us how to remember each one. When you have a law regarding a skewer, a maidservant, and follicles, those are malkiyu. We didn't learn any of those here. Whereas belorit, regarding the laws of forelocks, Efer mikle, burnt ashes, that's our law. And gvina, a law about cheese, that's Rav Malkiya. So ours is Efer mikle, and therefore you see, ours is in fact Rav Malkiya. Rav Papa, however, disagrees with this breakdown, and he says, Rav Papa Amar, matnitinu matnita Rav Malkiya, shmatata Rav Malkiyu. If you have a law that is in reference to a Mishnah or a Baraita, that an explanation of Mishnah or Baraita, then that's Rav Malkiya. Whereas a separate halacha is Rav Malkiyu. V'simanech matnitin malketa. How do you remember which one is which? Well, by this mnemonic, matnita, so that's referring to a Mishnah or Baraita, is malketa. So malketa is malkiya, malketa, meaning a queen. So that's a reference to those, whereas malkiyu, which sounds different, is the other one, and that would be simply the laws. My benaihu, about which of these 6 halachot would they actually disagree? Ika benaihu shefachot. The law about maidservants is in the malkiyu section over here, but according to the Papa, it will be in the malkiya section because it is in fact about a Tanaitic statement. Rav Bevai bar Abaye kapid afilu al ribda dechusilta. Rav Bevai bar Abaye, he would not even put ashes in a wound of bloodletting, even though it's obvious and a regular thing. People went and did bloodletting bloodletting, and you want to put some medication in there, and now that was a normal medication to put burnt ashes, he would not do that because it looks like he made a tattoo, so he was very stringent. However, Rav Asher Amar, Kol makom sheyesh sham makah, makato mochiach alav. Rav Asher was more lenient, and he said, anytime there's a wound, everybody can see, oh, that's a wound. So you put some ashes there as medicine for the wound. Everybody knows that's not a tattoo, and so Rav Asher thought there was no problem with that. Next Mishnah, which we just mentioned, Nasir shehaya shote yain kol hayom, en hayav ela achat. Amru lo al tishteh, v'hu shote chayav al kol achat ve'achat. If a Nazir, who's not permitted to drink wine, if he was drinking wine all day long, then he's liable only to one count. Someone warned him in the morning, don't drink wine, and he's continuing to drink wine the whole day. That's all considered one prohibition, one set of lashes. But if they tell him every time, don't drink, he takes a sip. Then they warn him again, don't drink, and he takes another sip, then he's liable for lashes every single time that he takes a drink. Hayam mittameh lametim kol hayom, eno chayav el achat. Amru lo al tittameh, vehu mittameh chayav al kol achat ve'achat. Again, with a Nazir who's not allowed to go into the cemetery and be tameh lamet. So if he was doing all day long, he's walking around in the cemetery, that would be one violation, one set of lashes, because they warned him once in the morning, and then he violated all day. That's one. But if every time they say, don't become tameh, and then he goes into the cemetery, they say, don't become tameh, he goes in again. In that case, because there are many warnings, he is liable for every time he becomes tameh. Haya, even though he was tameh already, he wasn't tahor, but he can't make himself tameh, he can't put himself in the situation of tumah again. Haya megalech kol hayom, eno chayav ela achat. Amru lo al tegalech, v'u megalech chayav al kol achat ve'achat. If someone was warned that he may not shave with a razor, and he shaves all day long, he's shaving, then he's liable only to one count, because it's one long procedure. However, if someone says don't shave and he shaves a little bit, and then he says, warn him again, don't shave, and then he shaves another spot, then he is liable for every single spot that he shaves. Haya lavush b'kilaim kol hayom, eno chayav ela achat. Amru lo al tilbash, hu poshet v'lobesh, chayav al kol achat ve'achat. All these examples here are brought because of this one that we just mentioned regarding the razor. But since we have that, so we bring other similar examples. If someone was wearing kilayim, wool and linen together, he is liable, even though he's wearing it all day long, that's only one count, and he gets only one set of lashes. He was warned once in the morning, don't put that on, that's it. But if every time all day long someone's warning him, don't wear that, and every time he removes the clothing and puts it back on, even though it's the same clothing on the same day, nevertheless he's liable each and every time he gets a warning and he takes it off and puts it on. Yesh choresh telem ahad vechayav alav mishum shemona lavin. While we're on the subject of getting many lashes even for just one act, or same act that one's doing all day, so now we show an extreme example of someone who makes one furrow, plows one furrow, and yet is liable to 9 instances of lashes. Hachoresh b'shor v'chamor. He plows together with 2 animals, an ox and a donkey. That's kilayim. You're not allowed to plow with 2 animals together. One is strong and one's weak, and it's going to cause suffering to the weak one. Vehen mukdashin, and they are hekdesh animals, consecrated animals. You're not allowed to use. V'kilayim bekerem, and you're plowing something that has wheat and grapes growing in the same place, which is kilei hakerem. Uba shivi'it, it's the shivi'it year when you're not allowed to plow at all. Ve'yom tov, it's yom tov, also a violation of melacha. Ve'chohen ve'nazir be'bet hatumah, and the place where they're plowing has corpses there and is tameh, and the person who's doing it is both a kohen, who's not allowed to be in the cemetery, and also a Nazir who's also not allowed to be in a cemetery where there are corpses. And so he gets 9 sets of lashes just for one act. Chananya ben Chachinai omer af halobesh kilayim. Chananya ben Chachinai says, I can add another one to the 8 if the guy who's plowing is also wearing wool and linen together. So while he's plowing, he's wearing wool and linen, he's going to get all these 8 plus a 9th set of lashes for wearing kilayim. Amru lo eno min Hashem. However, the other sages said to him, no, that's not the same as these. We want 8 things that we want the maximum number of things that one can do because one is plowing. The kilayim is just besides the point. He would be violating kilayim even if he wasn't plowing. That's just another thing that he's doing. We want to see 8 things that one can, or as how many violations can one do for one act of plowing, and this has nothing to do with that prohibition, with that act. Amar lehem af nazir lohu Hashem. But Hananiah ben Achinai had a good retort. He said, actually being a nazir and being a kohen for that matter in a cemetery, that's also not part of the same category as plowing. If you're just sitting there, just being there, is a prohibition, even if he wasn't plowing. So if you're going to count the fact that he's a Kohen and a Nazir, and he's in a place of impurity, so that's also not related directly to the plowing. So if you're going to count those, then you should also count the fact that he's wearing kilayim. Amar Bevai, Amar Rabbi Yosef, poshet velobesh mamash, o afilu machnis mosi bet yad un kali shelo. Regarding the guy who's wearing kilayim and he's taking it off and on all day long, and every time he gets warned, and he's liable to lashes every time. Does that mean that he has to take off the clothing totally and wear it and then put it back on totally? He has to be totally removed from his body. Or even if he just takes out one arm, puts the arm in, takes out off a sleeve and puts the arm back, the sleeve back on the arm. Is that sufficient to make him liable, even if the rest of it is on his body? And so Rav Avika answered him by making a gesture in which he put his arm inside and took it out of a sleeve, meaning, yes, only a sleeve is enough to make one liable. Rav Ashi Omer, afilu lo shaha ela kedei lifshot v'lebosh chayav. Rav Ashi is more stringent, and he said, even if he just leaves it on for the amount of time it would take to take the entire clothing off and put it back on, even if you're just sitting there doing nothing, not taking it off and put it back on, every time, how long does that take? 3 minutes? So every time 3 minutes passes where he could have taken it off and put it back on, he is liable for another time, as long as there is a warning between each one. Yesh chodesh telem. Now, to the case where one makes one plows one furrow, and yet he's liable to 8 counts. Amar Rabbi Yanai b'chabura nimnu v'gamru hachofeh b'kilayim lokeh. Rabbi Yanai said that when the rabbis got together, they discussed and they voted that someone who covers seeds of diverse kinds is flogged. In other words, not only if you plant or help grow wheat and grapes together, but even if they're there, the seeds are already there, and you just cover it. So it doesn't seem like you're doing much just by covering it. It would have grown anyway. So they discussed it and voted and said, no, that person also is liable to lashes for kilayim. Amar lehen Rabbi Yochanan, lav mishtatenu hizo, yesh chodesh telem echad v'chayav alav mishom shemona lavin, ha-chodesh b'shor u'b'chamor, v'hen muktashin, v'kilayim bekerem, ha-chodesh t'mechayev mishum kilayim, hechi mashkachad la, lav demikaseh behadeh de azil. So Rabbi Yochanan told the sages who they thought they came up with a big chidush. They sat and they counted and concluded. They took a vote, and then Rabbi Yochanan says, "What do you mean you took a vote? As if you're coming up with something new?" It's explicit right there in the Mishnah, our Mishnah, that says one can plow one furrow and yet be liable to 8 counts. And we said if one uses 2 different animals and they're hekdesh, and it's also kilayim, so So when it says one is plowing and one is liable because of kilayim, weed and in a vineyard, what cases are talking about? Well, you're not planting it. What are you doing? All you're doing is plowing it, which is just moves the dirt around. So that's just going to cover the seeds, and yet it says one is liable to flogging. So we could learn right here from our Mishnah that covering the seeds is enough to make one liable to Makkot for kilayim. So what do you mean that you voted? We're here, it's obvious in the Mishnah. Amar le ilav did lai lach chaspa mi mashkachat marganita tuta. And the Bianai was one that reported that in the council, this is what they voted on and they decided. So the Bianai told Yochanan, actually, we did come up with a chidush. And if it's not that I had lifted the earthenware shard for you, you would not have found a gem. So it's a mashal too. Someone's walking on the beach or whatever, and one person lifts up an earthenware shard. Normally, a shard is garbage. You would never think to look under it. But if someone opens it up, and then someone else comes and then sees that there was a gem under it. So the person that finds this, oh look, I found a gem. No, the one that uncovered it, he's the one that made it visible. So really, that person takes the credit. The other guy just saw something that is already made obvious because the first person uncovered it. And so that's what Rabbi Yanai is saying. We discovered this halacha, we expressed this halacha, and once you had it in your mind, then it was easy for you to say, oh look, I found it. But we're the ones that actually came up with it. You just, after the fact that it was already on your mind, then you found it in the Mishnah, but you never would have seen it in the Mishnah if not that we had prepared you by saying the law first. Amar le Resh Lakish le Rabbi Yochanan ilav de killesach gabra rabba hava amina matnitin maneh Rabbi Akiva hida amar hamkayem kilayim lokeh. So later on, Resh Lakish told Rabbi Yochanan, if not that a great man praised you, he was referring to the Rabbi Yanai. Now, even though he was saying, oh, you're taking all the credit, it's really me, but actually this was also a praise. He's saying, good job that you found this. It's true that we prompted you, and that's how you found it, so we helped you. But in fact, you did find this wonderful gem, so this was good teamwork. So now Rabbi Lakish is following up and saying, if not that Rabbi Yanai had praised you, then I would have thought, meaning if I had not connected this Mishnah with that law, then I would have thought that this Mishnah is actually the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that one is liable to kilayim not only if you plant it, not only if you do something active to make it grow, but even if you leave it there. You know it's there, and you don't remove it, you are liable. I would have thought that this Mishnah that says one is liable because you're plowing kilayim is following Rabbi Akiva, because you're not really doing anything to help it grow, so it must be just because you're leaving it there. That's why one is liable. But now that I heard the praise of Rabbi Yanai to Rabbi Yochanan, now I understand that actually this Mishnah is not necessarily Rabbi Akiva. It could be even not according to Rabbi Akiva, to the other sages who don't think that just leaving there is liable to kilayim, but rather he's liable because he covered it over. My Rabbi Akiva, where do we see that Rabbi Akiva says that just leaving kilayim there makes one liable? The Tanya, hamenakesh v'hamechapeh b'kilayim lokeh. Rabbi Akiva omer af hamekayem. It's in this baraita that says someone who weeds or covers kilayim will get malkot, whereas Rabbi Akiva says even if you just leave it there, maintain it, and don't remove it, one also is liable. My Tama de Rabbi Akiva de Tanya, sadecha lo tizra kilayim en li ela zoreya. What's the source for Rabbi Akiva's ruling? Because it says in a baraita, quoting a pasuk, your field you shall not sow with diverse kinds. From that pasuk, I would know only that one may not sow and may not plant diverse kinds. Mekayem minayin, but how would I know that just maintaining it also would make one liable? Tamud lomar behemtecha lo tarbiya kilayim sadecha lo tizra kilayim. It's from actually looking at the whole context and putting a comma in a different place. This is the same pasuk. The normal place to put the comma is two laws. Behemtecha lo tarbiya kilayim, do not breed different species, comma, sadecha lo tizra kilayim, and your field do not plant with diverse species. But if you ignore where the comma is and says and write just kilayim sadecha lo, with kilayim, you should not leave your field. So we learn from here, you can't maintain your field with kilayim in it. If you have to go and destroy it, and you can't even leave it there, that's the proof for Rabbi Akiva. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.